Hi friends, Miss Liz here again. Today we are doing blondies. So one of the questions that I do get asked is a blondie a brownie? Technically no, a brownie is a chocolate dessert bar that is a cross between a cookie and cake. And a blondie would be the vanilla version. So some people refer to it as a type of brownie, but technically it's the vanilla counterpart to a brownie. So a couple of key factors when you're making a blondie that make it a blondie and not a cookie bar. A cookie bar, we make a cookie dough and spread it into a pan. With a blondie, we're doing very specific things with some of the ingredients to give us that brownie type texture. One of the things that we're doing is we are melting our butter. When you melt butter and add it into the ingredients for a dessert, it causes your sugar to dissolve and gives you more of a syrupy type consistency. That's going to give us a dessert bar that bakes up chewy and crisp instead of fluffy. We use soft butter when we make cookies because we don't want to melt the butter and then dissolve the sugar before we bake them. Otherwise you will end up with a cookie that spreads out and becomes chewy and crisp on the edges. So when we're doing these blondies, that's what we're aiming for. We want that crisp edge that you get on a brownie and that really nice chewy texture in the center. Melting our butter is going to help us with that. So to start with, we're gonna melt our butter, which is 1.5 sticks, and I'm just gonna put it in the microwave for about 30 seconds until it's nice and liquid. Okay, so 1.5 sticks of butter is what I'm melting. And we're going to use all brown sugar for this. Again, we want that nice chewy texture and that richness. It's almost caramel-like in the flavor. And so by using all brown sugar, we're getting a little bit extra richness, and the consistency of it is going to feel a little fuller. And whereas if we use a granulated sugar, the consistency of it is going to be a little bit lighter, a little more crisp. The texture that we get from brown sugar gives us a little bit more chewiness, whereas all granulated sugar is going to give you more crispness. So we have our 1.5 cups, or 1.5 sticks of butter here. And it's mostly melted. When I stir it, you can see there's kind of a chunk there, but when I stir that, the rest of it's going to dissolve down. So I'm just gonna give this a little stir in here and let the heat from the rest of that liquid butter kind of melt it down. Just like that. Get it nice and soft. If that solid piece of butter in the center is not quite melting down, you can pop it back in, which is what I'm gonna do. It's still a little bit hard. I had just pulled it from the fridge. So I'm just gonna give it another 30 seconds to make sure it's completely melted. While I'm doing that, I'm gonna measure that brown sugar, 1.5 cups. Hang on, let me find the scoop that's right in front of me. 1.5 cups of brown sugar. So it feels like a lot, but we're only using brown sugar. So make sure when you measure brown sugar that you're packing it, that extra moisture in there is going to cause it to expand in the bag. And so we wanna make sure that we have the correct amount. 1.5 cups, so pack it down. Make sure you have a nice, accurate measurement. I'm gonna get my hot melted butter here. Oh yeah, that's much better. I'm just gonna stir that up, make sure that there's no more major chunks. And I'm just gonna pour that right on top of the sugar. The goal here is we wanna melt down all of that sugar so it's all dissolved, and we'll get kind of this caramely type mixture here. If you let your butter cool first, it's fine, it will still work. The thing is that if your butter begins to set up as it cools, at the end, the texture of the batter is going to be thicker, more like a cookie dough, which is totally fine. It'll remelt, and we've already dissolved to the sugar, which is the key element. It just means that you end up having to more press the dough into your pan instead of pouring it. Totally not a big deal. But if that happens, it's because your butter has cooled and become thicker. Don't add any more liquid to it. It's just because that butter has cooled and started to set back up. But it should taste fine. It'll remelt as it bakes in the oven. It just means you'll have to be a little more firm when you pack it down than pouring it into the pan. All right, so I have my sugar and my butter in here. Now I'm gonna add 2 eggs. Now the one thing I will say about the temperature of your butter, if your butter is still piping hot, you run the risk of scrambling those eggs when you add them in, so just make sure that it's just warm and not hot. A little bit warm is fine, it won't cook your egg. But we want to make sure that it's not steaming hot still, or you'll end up with a scrambled egg in your blondie, okay? So we're doing 2 eggs, just like that. And as always, if you have questions about this recipe or any of the techniques, always feel free to send me a message, post in the classroom. I'm always happy to help. Anything that you're confused about, or you just want a few more explanations about what makes a blondie different than a cookie bar, shoot me a message. I'm happy to chat with you. And posting in the classroom on the discussion board offers opportunity for your classmates to also ask and answer questions. So highly recommend doing that if you're comfortable as well. All right, so I have both of those eggs stirred in there, and you can see it's kind of just this soupy texture. That's totally fine. If yours is set up a little bit more because your butter has cooled, that's okay. Don't worry. As long as you got that sugar dissolved, that's the key part. All right, so the last liquid ingredient is vanilla. If you've had classes with me before, you know we always add the vanilla towards the end so that we don't overstir. Vanilla is an extract, which means it is an alcohol base, and the more you stir it, it begins to evaporate from your recipe, which means you're losing a little bit of that flavor. So we always add this towards the end so we don't overstir. So now I'm gonna go ahead and do my dry ingredients. Now you can absolutely get a second bowl out and measure. Sometimes I do, it depends on what I'm making. For this kind of recipe, I just go ahead and add everything into one bowl. The recipe instructions do say to use a second bowl, so if you're more comfortable in making sure that you don't get the clumps in the bowl, you can use a second bowl, but I just want to give you some tips on how to use just one bowl in case that's what you have available to you. What you're going to do is when you add your dry ingredients, you're going to add all of the dry ingredients to the bowl before you stir, because if you stir each individual dry ingredient into the wet, you run the risk of not having everything evenly dispersed and ending up with clumps. For example, if I were to add just baking powder in here, when that baking powder hits this sugary ingredient, it's more likely to clump up. But if I stir it in along with the flour, it'll disperse a little bit more evenly into the batter. So for the dry ingredients, we're gonna start with flour. We need 2 1/4 cups. So 2 full cups and then 1/4. Remember, when you're measuring flour, we always wanna keep it light and airy so we don't over measure by weight. When people are doing very exact baking, they will use a kitchen scale to make sure they have a correct amount. But you can sift, which means to scoop in and sprinkle. Some people have an actual flour sifter that sprinkles the flour into your measuring container. If not, you can use another scoop or a spoon. That works great. Just gonna get to my line here. There we go. All right, so that's 2. I'm just gonna pour that right in. And then I'm just gonna use this small scoop here for the 1/4. Don't over measure, just like that. All right, so I have 2 1/4. I am not stirring this in yet because I want to make sure that I have all of my dry ingredients added before I mix. So there's my flour. I'm gonna add my baking powder. I want 2 1/2 teaspoons of baking powder. Baking powder is a combination of baking soda and cream of tartar, which gives a little extra chewiness than using just baking soda. Baking powder is a really great ingredient for things that you want that little bit extra chewiness, and it also helps prevent things from becoming stale. Cream of tartar is a great thing to work with. So 1 1/2 teaspoons of baking powder in the bowl. Again, I have not stirred yet. All right, now I'm gonna add my salt. If you are using salted butter, if you didn't have unsalted butter on hand, You can skip this if you have salt in your butter already. If you're using unsalted butter, we want 1/4 of a teaspoon. It's just a teeny tiny bit. Make sure it's nice and level. 1/4 a teaspoon. Okay. All right, that's all of our dry ingredients. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to very gently stir those dry ingredients on the top so that they're kind of mixed together, and then use some nice big turns to spread those throughout the liquid now. Make sure you scrape the sides and you scrape the bottom so that you don't have any hidden pockets. All right. As you get that mixed in, and it's almost fully incorporated, that's when we're gonna add our vanilla extract, okay? So when it starts to look a little bit powdery, but almost all fully incorporated, we're gonna go ahead and add the vanilla for those final stirs, okay? Just like that. And we're doing 1 teaspoon of vanilla, okay? 1 teaspoon, right there. All right. Now, once we get this all mixed in, you have an option, if you would like, you can add some kind of chip to this, either a chocolate chip, a white chocolate chip, a butterscotch chip. For a true blondie, we want to avoid anything that's really chocolatey, and so I would recommend a white chocolate chip or a butterscotch chip. If you have nuts in your house, you can definitely do something like pecans or walnuts. Those are a great addition to a blondie. We are a nut-free house because my son has allergies, but if you wanted a blondie that has that traditional walnut or pecan, you can definitely add that if you like, okay? All right, so I'm all mixed in, and I have kind of this, it's still kind of runny, a little bit thicker than cake batter, but definitely not a cookie batter. If yours has become thick and it looks more like a cookie dough, that is okay. Again, it just means that your butter has started to set back up. Not a big deal. You're just going to press the dough into your prepared pan instead of pouring it, okay? So at this point, we're gonna go ahead and turn on our oven, 350. Let that preheat while we prep our pan. Now you have a few options. You can use a 9x13. You can use a metal pan, you could use a glass pan, you can use a stone pan, or you can use what we call a jelly roll pan. Jelly roll pan, this is a stone, is a pan that just has this nice short lip, but it's typically larger than 9x13. I believe this one is 11x14 or 11x15, so slightly bigger, but it's shorter, which means that you would spread the batter a lot thinner and you would end up with nice short bars. They tend to get a little more crisp. If you want a nice thick blondie, then you would definitely want to use more like a 9x13. Be aware of whatever size pan you're using will change the bake time just slightly. In a pan, 9x13 pan, 20 to 25 minutes usually, sometimes 30, depending on the time of year, the temperature in your kitchen, how set up your butter was. All of those things can vary. The goal will be for the cook time, I would set your timer for about 20 minutes so that you can check them. Poke with either a fork or a toothpick. If it is still runny and gooey on the toothpick, it needs more time. If it comes up and it's a little bit crumbly on there, that's totally fine. That's normal, especially for something that has a brownie type texture. But if it's still wet in the center when you poke it, it needs more time. Okay? All right, so what we're gonna do is we need to grease this pan. You can either use a cooking spray, you can use butter, you can use shortening, something so that these don't stick and it will be easy to take them out. So, nice coating across the bottom, and then the sides. Because I am using a shorter pan, they will go up a little ways. All right, so then what I'm going to do is I'm gonna take this and I'm just gonna pour this right into the pan. Like I said, if yours is sit up thicker, you might need to scoop and then flatten. And you can either do that with your fingers or you can do it with your spoon or a spatula. Just gonna pour all of this in there and then I'm gonna spread it out nice and flat along the bottom. Like I said, if you wanted to add chips, you definitely could do that. I would stir those into the bowl before you pour it into the pan. Or if you wanted them to be melted on the top, you could definitely sprinkle them on now. And then after they've baked, use a spatula and spread out those melted hot chips for more of a coating on the top. Either way would be fine. All right, just get these all spread nice across the pan. Okay. There we go. Get all of that done, just like that. Okay. And it will, as it heats up in the oven, it will spread out a little bit more. So if you have some gaps along the side or in the corner, it's okay, because as that butter melts again in the oven, it's gonna spread out more evenly, okay? So I just have it kind of spread a little bit in there. I'm gonna wait till my oven is preheated fully, and then I'm gonna set my timer for 20 minutes. Check and see if it's still wet and gooey in the center. Give it probably another 5 minutes. I definitely wouldn't think it would take more than 30 minutes. Otherwise, your edges of your blondie are going to become too hard and crisp. The center should be set up before then. So just check periodically as it's baking. If you have questions, feel free to shoot me a message or post in the classroom. And I hope that they turn out delicious. Thanks. Have a good day.